Why does the ruling class so hate Donald Trump? There's no doubt that they do. This is as true for the Conservatives and Republican Party establishment as it is for the Democratic Party and its cheerleaders in the corporate media. The likes of David Frum, Bill Kristol, and Max Boot never stopped whining about him. During the 2016 election, the flagship journal of the conservative establishment, the National Review, dedicated an entire issue to pillaring Trump. And the media lies about him have been so egregious that it appears that the corporate media is willing to allow its veil of legitimacy to be completely shredded for the sake of the holy cause of bringing down Donald Trump. Possibly the most socially destructive of these lies is the claim that he called neo-Nazis very fine people. For anyone who bothers to watch the relevant press conference, which is easily accessible online, this claim is manifestly false. He says literally 180 degrees the opposite. So here's a clip from CNBC. You see, this is the actual recording of CNBC. This clip is actually posted to the CNBC YouTube channel. So here's the famous line.
Excuse me, they didn't put themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people.
So that's the very fine people line, the famous very fine people line. So let's jump ahead to the 157 mark. So this is like 45, 50 seconds or something further on, 50 seconds further on. This is what he said.
And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people.
I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and white nationalists. They should be condemned totally. What could possibly be clearer than that? And yet for the subsequent 3 years, the corporate media has been repeating this libel. Just imagine how minority racial groups in America must feel being constantly told by the corporate media that their president is an apologist for neo-Nazis. This has been an immensely socially destructive lie, and one has to wonder how much of the violence over the summer of 2020, following the George Floyd death, was fueled by the fear and resentment of people who believed these lies of the corporate media. And can they be anything other than lies? These are highly educated people. Are we supposed to believe that they are too stupid or incompetent to listen to the videotape an additional, 50 seconds longer? And what about the journalists who were right there in the room in real time? They heard what he said. Why weren't they coming on air and denouncing this libel against the president? The corporate media and the ruling class in general have been so venal on this that in his maiden campaign ad, Joe Biden felt no reticence at all about repeating the manifestly false libel against Donald Trump.
And that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides? With those words, the President of the United States assigned a moral equivalence between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it.
What made the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party think he could repeat such a lie and get away with it? Because he knew the corporate media would never call him out? Because they'd been repeating the same lie for years? No, it wasn't stupidity or incompetence. It was malicious mendacity. They were wantonly lying. It was a relentless smear job. But this only brings us back to the original question of why. Why do they hate Donald Trump so much that they're willing to risk exposing themselves so nakedly as rank propagandists? Is it because they knew he was a Russian agent, a stooge of Putin who'd stolen the election? They certainly claimed that for over 2 years, but we now know that this wasn't true. All those intelligence operatives who regularly appeared on the current affairs shows of the corporate media claiming to have seen the damning evidence that would see Trump and his family indicted for treason had their opportunity during the in-camera sessions of the House Subcommittee to reveal to the elected representatives of the American people the details of this treacherous subversion of the U.S. Constitution by the elected president. Yet, one after another, when asked directly if they had any evidence or knew of anyone with evidence of Trump's collusion with Russia, they all said no. And of course, the findings of the Mueller report confirmed this lack of any such evidence. Like the Fine People lie, this was just another libel against Trump. It wasn't the reason they hated him, it was a lie they promoted because they hated him. But now, what are we left with as an explanation for this visceral reaction? He was unpresidential. He was violating norms. He was vulgar and narcissistic? Are these claims credible grounds for such venom and lies? To say nothing of the damage to the fabric of social trust across a society caused by promoting such libels? If you want to understand the ruling class's hatred of Donald Trump, you must look somewhat deeper. Over the last 100 years, there has been a quiet revolution in the Western world during which a new ruling class has displaced the older one. This new ruling class is the managerial class. These are individuals high in human capital, intelligence, cognitive skills, and educational credentials. Their natural domain is that of symbolic manipulation, numeric or phonemic, creating systems or narratives. This is a class which believes in the power of its own intellectual mastery. Their vision of the good life is grounded in a conviction in their ability to socially engineer all of society. They gain power through a slow and subtle displacement of the rule of the bourgeois capitalist class, first displacing them from the increasingly large-scale corporations of the Second Industrial Revolution in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, then with an increasing takeover of government under the auspices of government interventions from the New Deal to the Great Society. Interestingly, in the United States and elsewhere, in different forms, the managerial class led its quiet revolution against the bourgeois capitalist class in the name of the working class. They were legitimizing labor unions, pushing for higher wages, and creating social safety nets. However, at the same time, they were also neutralizing the power of the working class. The working class was de-skilled, reducing their negotiation leverage through processes of managerial science. Workers who'd once possessed practical skills that were invaluable to their bourgeois capitalist employers were reduced by the new managerial class to human cogs in giant production systems of the new corporate businesses, epitomized by the continual motion assembly line. By the latter decades of the 20th century, and especially during the 21st century, the managerial class consolidated its regime. And the working class discovered just how antithetical this managerial class was to their interests. A virtual corporate conveyor belt constantly shipped their jobs overseas, while masses of people from abroad were brought into the country, emptying the working class's towns and communities of high-paying jobs and driving down wages for what work remained. Drug addiction, depression, and reduced life expectancy among the working class spiked. The managerial class, masters of influence and persuasion, giving their facility with constructing systems and narratives, for 100 years, through the corporate media and elsewhere, sold us all the story of the bitter conflict between the bourgeois capitalists and the workers. We were supposed to believe that these mortal class enemies were duking it out for all the chips. Meanwhile, quietly, this newly emergent managerial class was displacing them both, using this sleight of hand to distract us as they consolidated their own power. And everything was moving along swimmingly, until Donald Trump stumbled onto the stage. One doesn't need to glorify or exaggerate the competence, motivations, or importance of Trump to appreciate the threat that he poses to this managerial class. His presidency does indeed pose a serious threat to them. At one level, it might be said that Trump is simply inconvenient for the managerial class. He's a thorn in their side who turns out to be just as good, and often vastly superior, at spinning and framing narratives. The overwhelming majority of members of the bourgeois capitalist class and working classes lack the facility with language and communication skills that are the mainstay of the managerial class. While Trump does have an undergraduate degree from Wharton Business School, his attitudes to business, his relentless entrepreneurship, and his self-celebration as a celebrity modern robber baron demonstrates that his life experience is that of a bourgeois capitalist rather than as a good-standing member of the managerial class. Yet, he repeatedly demonstrates he can match and even beat the best of that class in his ability to frame the narrative. From low-energy Jeb to crooked Hillary to build the wall to make America great again. Again, though, that would be little more than an inconvenience of class war if it weren't for the second factor, and that is that Trump has positioned himself as the head of a populist insurgency in America by the working class. And as the 2016 election demonstrated, and whatever the outcome of the 2020 election, it seems certain to confirm that at least contingently, that working class has embraced him as their spokesman and battering ram. You can criticize Trump all day as an opportunist, merely exploiting the populist insurgency. You can claim, probably correctly, that Trump is not that populist insurgency's ideal spokesman, that they don't care for him personally and would probably prefer a leader who was less vulgar and more articulate. That's fine, and probably much, if not most, of it is true. But none of that changes the fact that, for all the qualifications and shortcomings, Trump and the populist insurgency has demonstrated that it is possible to build a bourgeois capitalist and working class coalition which is manifestly capable of challenging the rule of the managerial class. They were able to seize the executive branch of the U.S. federal government. What might be possible if the populist insurgency got any bigger and better organized, and if they had bourgeois leadership that possessed Trump's narrative-making sophistication and bulldog determination, but without his widely alienating vulgarity and narcissism? Such a coalition could pose a genuine threat to the rule of the managerial class. That's why the ruling class hates Donald Trump, while they're willing to expose their own venality as a price of bringing him and the populist insurgency down. And why, whenever they regain full control of government, we will see a vast expansion of the current weaponization of the legal system and security establishment to wage malicious prosecutions against those who have aided this bourgeois working class coalition, such as we've seen with Michael Flynn, Carter Page, and Roger Stone. The goal is to make providing such leadership to the populist insurgency so costly that the ground of such a coalition will be burnt and salted for a generation. That explains why the ruling class hates Donald Trump and why they are willing to absorb such hits to their own credibility and legitimacy as an acceptable price to bring down his presidency. This entire analysis, though, is based upon a deep understanding of the managerial class. I provided this in my new book, The Managerial Class on Trial. The book is not out quite yet, but is rapidly on its way. If you want to have the earliest opportunity to get a copy and gain a deeper insight into what's really happening in the world today, I'll be posting a video here upon its release, so hit the subscribe button and you'll be among the first to have an opportunity to learn who the managerial class are, what they've been up to, and what price everyone else has paid for their managerial revolution over the last 100 years. If you think this analysis has value, even if you're not 100% sold, please like and share it. The broadest, most open discussion is essential for making sense of what's really going on beneath the surface of the corporate media indoctrination operation. And again, hit that subscribe button to not miss out on the earliest opportunity to read The Managerial Class on Trial.